I request if you want to move into the front rows just to fill up. Come on. It'd be good to see you on the front rows. Do you want to mind sitting here? Hello, good morning all. I hope you are settled down. So we're happy to go. Thank you all for joining us. Very good morning to you all. Good morning to your excellencies and honorable guests and my dear colleagues and young friends out in this room. I'm Nishad Shafi. I'm the co-founder of Arab Youth Climate Movement Qatar, an independent youth mobilization and advocacy association here in the state of Qatar, and also the steering committee member of UNESCO Climate Action Network, UCAN, which actually aims at youth-led network that provides youth with space to engage, participate, communicate, and generate solutions to address global climate challenge issues within the UNESCO's fields of competence. Today we have organized this session on unleashing the power of young people, supporting youth-led actions for climate in the LDC countries. We have been blessed with eminent experts on this panel. I am honored to have His Excellency Dr. Salah Nos, Secretary of State, Ministry of Education and Youth and Development for the country of Cambodia. Thank you for coming up. We have Mr. Howling Su, UNDP, UN Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Director for Bureau for Policy and Program Support at the UNDP New York. We have Mr. Abdullah Al Abdullah from Rota Executive Director and Education above all. We have Ms. Farida Abujan, Education Specialist, UNESCO Office in Doha for GCC and Yemen. We also have Ms. Brenda Hyplick from UNICEF Education Regional Advisor for the MENA region. And my amazing distinguished youth delegates, I would be naming them when I'm going to their sessions, so hold on for that. So it's my very honor and pleasure to moderate this session today, to have this high-level session of intergenerational dialogue with leaders and UN agencies and developing agencies, along with our young people. We know that LDC countries are incredibly vulnerable to environment and economic shocks and are disproportionately affected by the climate change, which they did little to cause. From across the Africa, Asia Pacific and Caribbean, the LDC group represents a population of over 1 billion people, yet contribute less than 1% of the global CO2 emission. But the impacts of climate change have a great concern to their young people around the world, especially in the LDC countries. The Youth Declaration to the 5th United Nations Conference on LDCs presents key recommendation to the member states from young people to approach youth policy in the least countries that allow young people to take a proactive role in implementation of new programs of action for the LDCs. They are raising their voices to advocate for access to decision-making and spaces and mechanisms to enable them to contribute to design, implementing, and review of climate policies and programs at the respective countries. Yet, despite these efforts, young people's engagement are often ends up in very tokenistic, marginal, unclear, and without adequate resourcing, funding, information, and support. It is imperative for all our stakeholders to recognize their ideas, solutions, and youth expertise should be brought to table so their engagement are built to an equal, fair, resilient, and sustainable ideas to the benefit of the process and represent them in a very meaningful and worthwhile experience. This high-level intergenerational dialogue will explore how young children and young people can be inclusively and meaningfully engaged in the design and the content of climate policies, priorities, and process in the LDC countries. And also promote an intergenerational dialogue between young people, member state, and our UN agency partners and development partners on the climate change agenda in the LDC. And further discuss on recommendation from the young people to how to transform the LDC Youth Declaration into action. Well, that's my opening remarks, and without much ado, I call upon Her Excellency Ms. Rabab Fatima, the United Nations Office of High Representative for Least Developed Countries, to give her opening statement. Fortunately, she couldn't make up. We have on her behalf Ankit Gai, who will be making the opening remarks on her behalf. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Aniket Gai. I'm a senior officer in the Office of Under-Secretary General Fatima. She sends her sincere apologies that she is not able to be here herself. She's been drawn into pressing business in her capacity as Secretary General of the conference, but she attaches high importance to youth and to climate change and to this meeting. And so she has asked that her words nevertheless be conveyed, and so I will be reading those out. On behalf of Rabab Fatima, His Excellency Dr. Sles, Secretary of State of Cambodia, Mr. Howling Su, Assistant Secretary General of the UN Development Programme, dear youth representatives, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to join your discussion on climate change, which is such a crucial topic affecting the world today. I am happy that LDC5 provides an opportunity for you, the young people from LDCs, to share your perspectives and the perspectives of your peers in shaping the Sustainable Development Agenda and abating the climate crisis. We have heard it many times during this conference, but it is worth saying it again. The world is facing an unprecedented series of crises and intertwined shocks. And climate change is the defining crisis of our time. Climate change-induced natural disasters are increasing both in frequency and intensity. Young people in the LDCs face a double disadvantage in this regard. Despite contributing the least to the causes of climate change, LDCs find themselves disproportionately affected by its consequences. They are the countries on the front line of the emergency. Likewise, children and young people are the generation least responsible for the climate crisis, and yet they bear the brunt of its devastating impacts. In LDCs, they face a deadly combination of exposure to multiple climate and environmental shocks and can be highly vulnerable due to inadequate essential services such as water and sanitation, healthcare, and education. But all this is not to say that they are voiceless victims. Far from it. In LDCs, roughly 60% of the population are under 25 years old. This demographic feature of LDCs presents a challenge, but also a powerful opportunity for these countries to accelerate progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Millions of young people stand ready to become development leaders and drivers of transformative change. Indeed, many are already forging a path in these roles today. They are increasingly active, engaged in climate action, forming social movements, and using digital technologies to demand action from governments. Young people are keenly aware of the challenges and the risks presented by climate change. Indeed, recent studies show an overwhelming sense of concern for the climate among this generation. And through education, science, and technology, young people are scaling up their efforts to accelerate action on climate issues. we need to recognize and mainstream this action. Ladies and gentlemen, the Doha Programme of Action for the next decade presents a blueprint for the LDCs to accelerate progress towards the SDGs. I want to highlight just 3 key ideas that could help turn the ambitions of the Doha Programme of Action into reality. First, we must increase youth participation and inclusion in decision-making processes. This is especially true for young women and young people in vulnerable situations, who are most often locked out of these processes. Second, we need to include young people in delivering the solutions to these problems that we have talked about. Children and young people have critical skills, experiences, and ideas for safer and more sustainable societies. Third, we must empower young people to take specific actions against climate change, and this begins with education. We need to add climate change to school curricula in LDCs and equip young people with the skills and learning to take on the most pressing issue of our time. Young people are agents of change, the entrepreneurs and innovators, not just of tomorrow, but also today. I'm confident that if successfully implemented, the Doha Programme of Action will ensure a better, greener, and more equitable future for young people. I look forward to working in partnership with you all to turn pledges into practice and empower young people to deliver the change they need. I wish you a fruitful discussion today, and I look forward to hearing more about your ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guy, for that excellent opening remarks on behalf of Rabab Fatima, who couldn't make it. Thank you so much for having you here. Once again, a round of applause on that great keynote speech. So now we'll jump into our intergenerational dialogue with our member states, agencies, and our young champions here. Thank you once again. I'll briefly start with remarks. So we would love to have this as a dialogue with our young people and development agencies, UN agencies here. And this could be more like an interaction where you get to know what are their aspirations, again, what is done, and what are our international agencies supporting ways. So you might have known climate disasters leave long shadows for decades and years, even generations. There is a growing recognition that we cannot leave behind vulnerable communities, especially children and young people in the LDCs, who bear the component impacts of climate change, biodiversity loss, health, and socioeconomic crisis. I want to ask our young colleague, Mr. Mohmed Okash, who is the Director of Institute of Climate and Environment, Simad University, to actually see from your experience and your perspective context, how can you see decision makers ensure that young people are meaningfully included in the design and implementation of policies, priorities on climate-related process. So, Mohmed Okash.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone, all protocol observed. First of all, I want to congratulate today for all the women in the room for the International Women's Day and the women beyond this room and all over the world. As we all know, women play a very crucial role in accelerating the path to sustainable development in all our countries, especially mainly in the LDCs. As someone from Somalia, women are the main stakeholders in building resilience, in investing in businesses, and also taking climate action. And we also need to mention and keep in our mind that they bear the burden of climate crisis than anyone else in the communities. Now, coming back to answer your question, yes, climate crisis is a defining issue in our lifetime, and mainly to least developing countries, including Horn of Africa and Somalia. And it's also fundamental that we also keep in our mind that these LDCs are the least contributors of the global greenhouse emissions. So we are not contributing to a crisis, but we also bear the burden of the crisis. So what we need to do now, when the situation is like this, we need to take action collectively and build a solidarity with the rest of the world so we can find a common solution. So as someone who works in the field of academia and research with the young people and for the young people, I think it's imperative to take three main steps to invest the young people to ensure they are part of the national policy priorities, designing the national policy priorities or the global ones. Number one is invest in the young people. The young people of today, they know they are more educated than any other generation in the past, and they are the largest young people ever in the world. So global level, but also in the least developing countries. So we need to invest them, give them the tools to thrive and survive in this very complex and dynamic world by giving them the right access to education. Today, I think we should be launching the online LDC University, so which is a very good initiative that the young people could benefit as well. So invest in the young people. In my institute, we have a climate action incubator where we incubate the green initiative led by the young people. So at the end of the training, they need an investment from different stakeholders, whether the private sector, the government sector, or development partners, to ensure those initiatives are transformed into realities in the local grounds. So investing is one of them. And number two is including them in the decision-making process. Including the young people in the decision-making process is not a privilege we are seeking. It's a fundamental right. So we need to treat it as a right for the young people to be included in decision-making. And by doing this, we need to amplify their voices in every decision and every policy priorities we enact as a national or global institutions. Now, at this moment, most of LDCs are either in the process of developing their national determined contributions or their national adaptation plans. So since the young people are the majority of those communities, the young people should be part of the process by amplifying their voice, by integrating their ideas and initiatives into the national development programs. And lastly, guaranteeing their fundamental human rights. I'm talking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is an existed body of document. So it's not a new. We are not seeking for new things. We are not seeking for additional things. We just need to implement those fundamental rights. Those include the right to access to education, right to access to clean water, food, health. So we build a growing, a thriving, and healthy young people. Those could be the right holders and agents of change in our community. So I think the combination of those three will accelerate our role in taking climate action and also empower a lot of young people to lead climate action in their local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohmed Okash. Rightly mentioned how academia and investment in young people and making young people not privileged, but they have the right to be there, to making sure their voices are heard in more on policy making, and also exclusively on the human rights part and access to health, etc., are really key. And thank you, Mohmed Okash, to bring that on the table. And now I turn on to our UNDP partner to actually share what is from their perspective, what you heard from Mohmed Okash. What do you think the decision maker, how can they actually ensure their real participation? I move on to Howling Sue to make his statement.
Thank you very much, Nasheed. And I think what Mohammed said was exactly, I think, what's needed. Investing in young people and including young people in decision making. And I think the last point is to take a rights-based approach, look at what they can do. So I just want to maybe add a few details as to, in fact, how we are doing this. I think we fully share with your philosophy and approach. Now, when it comes to young people and their participation in climate actions, we have done a few things. We have taken a number of initiatives. in UNDP, for example, we have an initiative called Climate Promise, in which we're supporting 120 countries, developing countries, to enhance their nationally determined contributions. And I think out of the 120 countries in the Climate Promise, 40 are the least developed countries. So in this way, we work with the governments to take a multi-stakeholder approach. And I'm very happy to report that 94% of these 120 countries have included a prioritization of political will and societal ownership in the process. And in this regard, the youth consultation is an integral part of it. So we work with governments, to ensure that young people are part of the discussion. Most important policy instruments, the NDCs, they're part of it. And also, at country level, for example, in Zimbabwe, we worked with the government to establish a youth desk within the government ministry, youth desk, really dedicated to the questions and issues, concerns of the young people. In Laos, PDR, and we also have included, worked with the government to include the youth groups into interministerial and the multi-stakeholder coordination platforms, and organized a youth and the climate dialogue. So these are just some examples. If the time is short, I won't get into many other examples. Now, we have a very exciting partnership with Qatar, which is supporting UNDP to establish this accelerated lab network around the world. And this is a network that really focuses on innovation, leveraging the creativity and the power of young people in finding development solutions. And this network is really in more than 100, working more than 100 countries. And a lot of the solutions that they've identified are at grassroots level and with young people. And finally, I would say that there are really many platforms that the UN is advocating to include young people. And the most important happening in the last year is the establishment of the youth office. The resolution of member states last September to establish a UN youth office that would integrate the current, the envoy of the youth, Secretary General's envoy on youth, and other, political and engagement activities in the future office of the youth. And also in the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda, the youth engagement and the future generations are really important policy issues that the Secretary General is studying and will be putting forward to member states for further review and discussion. So really there are many ways that we are actually practicing what Mohammed said, and we fully support. Thank you.
Thank you, Howling Shu, for mentioning what UNDP is doing in the LDC member countries and across the world, from the accelerator program, which you mentioned, Qatar is supporting, to the climate program, climate promise program, as well as interesting the youth desk program, which are really innovative, and I hope it get more and more visibility and support from other member states to introduce in their respective countries. So thank you so much. Now I jump into Ms. Brenda to see what UNICEF is actually doing on this regard, and take from what Mohmed Okash has mentioned, like youth space, where exactly UNICEF falls in this.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues, and happy International Women's Day to fellow females here in the room, especially young females, and to our sisters around the world listening in. You're going to hear many points repeated this morning. I think that's important. UNICEF, along with many other agencies, is already supporting young advocates in their efforts to work on climate change, as the climate change crisis is a child's rights crisis. Children and young people are the least responsible for climate change, and yet they bear and will bear the greatest burden of its impacts. As UNICEF, we are very committed to evidence-based planning, and that means collecting data that affects children and young people and climate change. In 2021, UNICEF published the Children's Climate Risk Index to assess how climate change is disproportionately impacting children. The index reveals that approximately 1 billion children live in countries classified as extremely high risk of the impacts of climate crisis around the world. 80% of these are LDCs. UNICEF has also just developed a Children's Climate Risk Index for least developed countries. This report provides assessments of children and young people's exposure to climate and environmental hazards, to shocks and stresses, and to underlying vulnerabilities in LDCs that will help prioritize action, including appropriate adaptation measures for those most at risk. And we know that if you're already vulnerable before a climate crisis affects you in your own community, you will be more vulnerable when the climate crisis comes to you. Although the long-term solution to the climate crisis is a reduction of emissions to safe levels, adaptation and resilience building around the world, we also have to protect children and young people now as we move into the future. Another area where UNICEF works is that we do our best, like other agencies, to help support putting young people, females and males, at the heart of the response, because they are already in the driver's seat making change. And we've heard that throughout this week's discussion in many panel presentations. UNICEF is tapping into the power of young people, working with them hand in hand as partners, as active agents of change, and supporting them as advocates as they sit at the table, as and with decision makers, and inspiring them to volunteer to create a more sustainable future. Importantly, when young people, females and males, take actions to help address local problems in their communities, they develop essential skills such as problem solving, teamwork, leadership, negotiation, adaptability, resilience, and critical thinking. These are all increasingly important in a climate vulnerable world and are absolutely essential to support our transition as a planet into a greener future. Lastly, I want to mention the transformative power of education. For UNICEF, education plays a critical role to help prevent the acceleration of climate change by equipping children and young people with capacities, relevant skills, knowledge, experience that help them to act towards net zero carbon communities and to adapting to the impacts of climate change. Finally, a few examples. UNICEF is supporting governments across the LDCs. For instance, in Burundi, UNICEF has supported the Ministry of Education to engage students in climate-friendly entrepreneurship, in building using solar energy stoves for cooking, and reducing the utilization of wood. In Madagascar and in Somalia, UNICEF is supporting ministries of education to include disaster risk reduction in the education system, from curriculum, teacher training, planning, and even supporting construction in cyclone-resistant classrooms in Madagascar. In Côte d'Ivoire and Cambodia, and it's lovely to see our Minister of Youth and Sports from Cambodia here today, UNICEF is supporting ministries of education to incorporate climate change topics into national curricula. And that's really important because if we want to make change, young people need to be understanding and discussing climate change and the climate crisis, both in school, in formal classrooms, and outside in their communities. Lastly, just to reiterate, UNICEF is working with member states, with partners around the world, including in LDCs, to ensure that young people, women and men, boys and girls, are active agents of change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brenda, for actually explaining what UNICEF does, including a special emphasis on the education part, and also your program in LDC countries on eco-entrepreneurship, which is quite an exciting program to develop more and more climate-resilient technologies, etc. So, jumping in from education, what Ms. Brenda mentioned, my next question to my very fellow youth activist, Ms. Eliala Aveniteli from Tuvalu, on which strategies and policies that should be prioritized when engaging with young people at local communities that are affected by impacts of climate change in order to create a lasting impact at a very grassroots level.
Thank you very much for the question, and Talofa, happy International Women's Day. My name is Eleala Amanitele, and I come from Tuvalu, a stunning island nation with 11,000 beating hearts. In the last few years, I have been blessed to be in various roles that have allowed me not only gather information, but also disseminate it. And so, when working with and supporting the development of young people to achieve their full potential, this requires one in a position like mine. To foster an enabling environment or safe spaces for youth to become agents for change in various policy development platforms, movements, and environment initiatives. Safe spaces where young people are encouraged to speak openly and honestly, where learning from each other is encouraged, and in the Pacific context, navigating our engagements with the wider community in a respectful manner and build meaningful intergenerational partnerships between our elders and the youth. To achieve long-term impact at the grassroots level, young people need to be included and meaningfully engaged right at the start of the strategy and policy development process. This plants the seed in a young person that they are contributing to something much bigger than themselves. It plants the seed of ownership, where they not only see themselves as participating in the development process, but also the implementation and the review. Building community resilience requires ownership and the sense of belonging so that communities are invested in the successes and committed toward addressing and learning from the failures together. It is also important to also mention that governments and NGOs, CSOs, do not necessarily build resilience, but facilitate the strengthening of resilience at the community level, either through building capacity or providing resources, financial or technical support. Communities like mine back at home have always been resilient, even more so when coming from island nations. It is just now with the scale and pace of climate change impacts, our people need that little extra help to keep up and cope with the changes. Governments, NGOs, and CSO must engage respectfully with communities and young people as equal partners in building resilience. Where our people are at the center of decision making, activities, goals, and outcomes that affect their future. All too often, we see well-intentioned international donors and academics breeze in and out of Tuvalu, focused on spending money to achieve KPIs and goals set in faraway offices in Australia. I traveled 2 days to be here in Doha. New Zealand, America, and Europe. Often the projects they come in to implement do not achieve the expected outcomes for the community. Why? Because the young people and community are not in the center. So how then do we engage young people and communities in safe spaces, where they are at the center, and to plant the seeds of ownership to build resilience as a group or collective? For Tuvalu, and indeed other parts of the Pacific, this means working both within existing formal and informal spaces, systems and structures, government laws, regulations, code, and standards in the formal system, and traditional leaders, indigenous knowledge, experts, and practitioners, and community elders in the informal ones. An example of where the formal and informal come together so well is in the integration of climate and weather data, formal, with indigenous knowledge, informal, to develop disaster risk reduction standards that can be followed by the community. Include and engage youth in decision-making processes, being conscious of the needs of the most vulnerable and the context and challenge that we face or they face. I recall 2 years ago, during the national consultations on the review of Tuvalu's constitution, young people just in a room like we are now had the session with the committee and made a passionate demand that youth be involved in community decision-making structures. The committee leader, who was also our former politician, told me that our time will come and not to force foreign concepts to traditional practices. As a young person, this saddened me. And I asked him, how can you expect us youth to do great things if we are not included as part of decision-making today? Now is the time to involve us and let us contribute solutions and learn to be your better version as a leader.
Thank you, Aliala. Really inspiring thoughts on how young people can really make a very grassroots changes and why it is important to have young people on the decision making, not just tokenistic, giving them those decision making powers, learning together with the peers, also bringing up the indigenous knowledge aspect here, which is quite very necessary, which cannot be left unseen, and also bringing issues why it should be youth-centric policies that should be delivered, and the cases of your countries. It's not just funding and sending a lot of money to the country would solve the crisis at the very bottom level. It's to really finding the partners, that is the grassroots organization and the youth, in delivering that to the community. So thank you so much for that remarks, Iliala. I then move into His Excellency Dr. Sals Nos, Secretary of State from Ministry of Education and Youth and Sport of Cambodia, to make a statement on this regard.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good morning, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, and also congratulations for happy Women's Day today. I'm from Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport of Cambodia. As you may be aware, after climate change has become one of the greatest risks facing humanity and high priority of a global concern in the 21st century. As the Earth continues to head up, the severity of climate change impact on the global socio-economic development and environmental sustainability continue to intensify and amplify, prompting the need to seek urgent solutions. Having ratified the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1996, Cambodia has actively participated in the international community in the effort of addressing climate-related issues. However, the country remains highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change due to the high dependency on the climate-sensitive sectors such as agriculture, forestry, fishery, tourism, etc., which form the critical foundation of its economic growth and support of livelihood of the great majority of its population. Cambodia prioritized youth in its national strategic development plan and implementation of the national policy on lifelong learning and the national policy of Cambodia youth development. Among the strategic areas volunteerism has been identified as one of the key priorities for promoting youth development. Policy measures have been launched by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport to mainstream youth volunteerism in the National Education Strategic Plan. In education, the Cambodian government, through Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport, has taken solid reform strategy to ensure inclusive, equitable, quality education and promote lifelong learning for all. Cambodian youths have given full space to engage in civic activities, which have become part of the school curriculum and important mechanism to make youths become well-informed, well-rounded, and engaged citizens. Cambodian youth is given opportunity to engage in political presentation, political debate, and performance in the national, regional, and global platform with a range of topics, including climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for bringing up the important aspects in the climate change issue. That's the education and how Cambodia is actually working on to bring a very grassroots education system in the government. And I thank you for your efforts to doing that back in your country. So now moving on to next aspects of the discussion on the climate justice. Climate justice, as we know, we need to acknowledge that the children and the young people are particularly vulnerable to climate crisis, and they need to be prepared for the challenges that lies ahead. Climate education, as we now heard, plays a key role in preparing and empowering children and young people to deal with climate change and ensuring climate action, which also includes climate justice. Now, I want to ask another young champion here, Ms. Brenda Mowley, climate change youth advocate and chief operational officer for Green Goals platform in Malawi, an official children and youth constituency of the United Nations Framework for Convention of Climate Change, UNFCCC, Yango. So I asked Brenda, what can decision makers take to foster a deeper understanding of environmental and climate change issues among children and young people, and how this knowledge can be applied in practice for benefit of local communities?
All right, so thank you so much. I think because of time, I'll just go straight to intervention. So when COVID-19 pandemic erupted, I think that's the time when nobody saw it coming. I think everybody was panicking, and every person knew that we are all vulnerable to the pandemic. And there were no resources that were already put beforehand to say we are going to tackle the pandemic. There were no policies that were put in place to prepare ourselves towards the pandemic. There were nobody has ever received, had never received education or had ever majored in to do with COVID-19 pandemic. But despite knowing that we are all vulnerable to the pandemic, we also knew that we are the change makers and the innovators that were going to help ourselves in combating the pandemic. There were so many collaborations that happened, there were so many partnerships, there were so many efforts, and there were so many resources that were channeled towards COVID-19 pandemic. And this is that's where we are right now. I don't think we would have been here. We didn't know that we were going to have a moment where we can actually have in-person meetings like we are right now, shaking hands anymore. And that sense of energy, I think that's the kind of sense of energy that we need right now towards climate change. Because even hard to reach areas, everybody knew that there's COVID-19 pandemic, and this is what's needed if we are to combat the pandemic. But then what's making it hard even also to have that kind of sense of energy, the same efforts, the same coordination, the same partnerships, and the same resources, so that we can be able to channel the same energy and the efforts towards climate change, because we see it coming. We know the impacts that are there. We have so many stories like testimonies or like of the impacts from the frontline communities of how people are being affected. So if we are to make sure that if we are to combat climate change, we don't have to leave youth and children the same way we were also involving youth and children during COVID-19 pandemic, because we knew that everybody is like a change maker. So I think right now, I think it's high time where we no longer see youth and children as vulnerable. I think it's also high time where we see youth and children as innovators, as change makers. And the same way, like it's not just about like putting the climate education in like curriculum. Even like out of school, how about those people who are like out of school? Because we need coordinated efforts. No one is to be left behind if we are to achieve what we want to achieve. If we want to create the better world that we want to see, because we are seeing that islands, like our land is sinking. Like we will no longer have nations out there. Like the way people are being affected. What's making it so hard for us like to use the same emphasis, the same resources, the same channels that we're using for COVID-19 to also tackle climate change, because we actually know this is happening. Even the policies that are put in place, there's no such thing as being youth at heart. There's no such thing as being a child at heart. It's either you're a youth, it's either you're a child, and you know you're not only vulnerable, and this will not just affect other people's children, even our children as decision makers. They are also in the group of the people that are going to be mostly affected. So whatever it is that we are doing is no longer about considering like putting youth matters at hand. We have to include youth in whatever it is that we're doing. In all like there was the same way we're trying to make, like youth are coming up with so many innovations. Can we promote those innovations, local-made innovations, that are also trying to impact the communities? The same education, it shouldn't just be in school, even out of school. I think that's very important if we are to achieve what we want to achieve and impact the communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you for bringing up 2 points on the innovation and education outside the school or a regular setup. When we say we give emphasis on education, not on very formal setup in the school, but also beyond that. So it is absolutely critical to have people who are not part of the formal education, including refugees. So that's a good point to bring up, Brenda. I move again back to His Excellency Dr. Nose to hear his point of view from the education perspective. We hear, again, education and innovation. So from your experience back in Cambodia and your work, how do you really see this can be applied for benefiting the local community?
Yeah, as the national commitment to the climate change, Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport of Cambodia and the Ministry of Environment recently released a joint statement in the 2022 at 9 points as in summary. One is to continue to integrate climate change into policy programs, strategies and national action plan, as well as development and budgeting plan in the education sector at both national and sub-national level. Recognize education as a priority sector to promote training, dissemination and capacity building on climate change at all levels of educational institutions. Equip teachers and students at all levels with the teaching materials of climate change as needed. Integrate climate change into higher and postgraduate education program, especially develop the subject measuring master degree in climate change. Develop innovative teaching material for the students, extracurricular activity of climate change and environmental issues. Extensively promote the concept of eco-friendly school, especially establishment of the eco clubs where students can increase their understanding of climate change and environmental education in their school and community to study, research, and evaluation the vulnerability of education sector as part of implementation of the updated nationally determined contribution under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Encourage competition program at this educational institution, especially university, on climate change adaptation activity. Identify educators, collect data to assess the impact and adaptation measure for climate change in school and community, such as drought, heat wave, flood, and hurricane, so that the effect can be avoided. And it is to improve school infrastructure, such as equipping the assessing clean water, sanitation, addressing temperature rise through tree planting and use the electric fan, lightning prevention, etc., to be resilient under climate change. With the support of the Cambodian Climate Change Alliance, research partnerships have been provided to 3 public universities, focus on 3 topics. One is the effect of global warming on education, government, and construction sector. The second, natural climate change mitigation measure for coastal urban flooding. The third, infrastructure resilient to climate change and enhancing the ability to store organic carbon in the soil. I think with the 2030 SDG goals, we understand that we have a lot of work ahead of us, which need collective effort. The LDC5 youth part is an important contribution to our journey toward our shared goals. Our today present demonstrates our commitment to the youth development, youth engagement, and good youth empowerment. I wish the whole session a great success. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It was great to know what Cambodia has been doing since your resolution in 2022 regarding climate change in education system and how you want to move climate education beyond schools to postgraduate programs and also in research areas. It is great also to know involving climate change education in innovation and extracurricular activities. Building eco clubs, eco schools are quite innovative, and I wish all the success to all the programs you're doing back in Cambodia. Moving from the climate education, I want to take it one step forward with my another youth climate champion here, Mr. Hamre Mama from Tanzania, who is one amongst us as the Youth for Climate delegate from Tanzania. From your experience, what do you think that is best to equip young child or young youth with the knowledge and skill and resources to engage meaningfully in climate change action?
Okay, thank you so much for this very important question. My name is Humphrey Brema. I'm the Youth for Climate delegate. Thank you for having me. I think it's very important to develop skills from the very young age to make sure that we are having a robust and we are having a vibrant generation of young people who are ready to take aggressive actions in fighting climate change. I clearly remember in 2021, under my organization, I went to one of the rural communities in Tanzania which has been affected by floods, as we know that Tanzania is among the climate vulnerable countries. So I went to one of the primary schools to provide education to young children and young students there. And I told them that the floods that have affected their community is the results of the impacts of climate change. So we need to take action. One kid approached me, he is like 6 to 7 years old, and he told me the story how he lost his mother and 2 sisters because of floods that happened in their community. And he asked me a very touching question that if I plant trees today, will it be helpful to make my other remaining siblings survive? Will it be helpful to make sure that we are not losing our properties, we are not losing our lives anymore? It was a touching question because it is imperative and absolutely important to make sure that we cascade the education of climate from a very young age. I have also have like a real experience of how floods and hunger have affected countries in Tanzania. I'm coming from one of the regions in Tanzania called Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro, it's a region and also it's famous because the highest peak in Africa is found Kilimanjaro because of the mountain we have. When you trace back 30 years from now, Kilimanjaro had a lot of snow cap. But as we are speaking, scientists have predicted that by 2040, the snow cap will be drastically vanished. Mount Kilimanjaro is accommodating millions of species there. What are we going to do? If we are too ambitious and too visionary to set net zero by 2050, why are we hesitating to develop leaders of 2050? If we really know that by 2100, the world will be surpassing 3 degrees centigrade, why are we not doing things to young children right now and making sure that they are accommodated? We usually think about ourselves. I remember last year I attended Interministerial Conference on Migration, Environment and Climate Change in Uganda as a youth delegate, where we successfully adopted Kampala Declaration to address climate mobility challenges. I asked one of the officers from the ministry in my country, like, we are doing a lot of things, but you are not involving us. He said the policies are not friendly. So if we have policies to make sure that our leaders who are even about to phase out, they are still going there, but we know nothing, where are we going? I think this is the time to take action. This is the time to do something to make sure that climate education is also incorporated in the syllabus we are having in our schools, because children are no longer tomorrow's generation, but today's and later generation. Let's empower them and the future will be promising. I submit.
Thank you, Hamret. So bringing up those issues which are very close to you and how the flooding experience you faced opened up, avenues of what young people have nothing to do. They burn the climate impacts on a day-to-day life. It is very imperative that those things shouldn't happen anywhere else, not only just in the LDC countries. So thank you for bringing that up. And also you are pushing for youth involvement. So we're still talking about with November stage here, thinking young people will be involved. So we hear from you that it's a far outside. We are still not there. We need to really push hard to make youth involved in those discussions. We've been hearing this for long. We've been having more and more intergenerational dialogues. This to bridge that gap, to bring them more involved in this. So we hope it happens sooner or later, where young people are taken seriously, not like I mentioned in my opening remarks, just for a tokenistic approach. So I jumped to one of our development partner here from Education Above All and Rota, Mr. Abdullah, to provide some input. They've been working with a lot of countries across the world. What is that you believe can be instrumental in providing those countries in terms of education that help them to come up with meaningful initiative to take climate action?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, Nishad. And thank you for Ms. Also Farida, Prime Minister, regarding that. Of course, we really need always to echo and repeat the importance of the urgency of climate change as a global, really big issue, or should be the first in the priorities to be tackled. So I always keep changing and what I'm going to say here, but I will really try to keep it quite organic, to really emphasize and echo that the urgency of the climate change, and the second thing about how crucial and vital the youth engagement in the at any level of climate change plans, policies, and programs. But here I'm also happy to maybe share with you as maybe the first audience to know about what we find out during our revisiting our strategies and lesson learned from the field, from the last project cycles and strategy within education above foundation. So just again, I'm from Reach Out to Asia, wrote a program of education above all foundation. And we always support and engage youth to really, as a change makers, in tackling the challenges that they are facing in their communities. And we found out that recently also we also working in a couple of LDCs like Mozambique and Nepal, and those projects has a component of climate change. And the sense of really needs and urgency and the willingness of the youth there is really surprise us, and it's kind of really enormous of that we really have to really even more focus on give more priorities to climate change, and that's what inshallah going to happen starting from 2023. So let me just go through from my notes to not miss any of the ideas I'd like to share with you today, guys. So the new mandate is about providing climate change education and youth-led climate action. And that's what we suggested from the findings from our project. And we put it under an umbrella of to put all these projects into one mandate, and it's hold kind of a message in itself. So education for climate action. And especially we really also inspired and guided by some of the findings from the Transformative Education Summit, which suggests the importance of a greening education, and to start from the level of a school, to integrate climate change education curricula in the schooling system. And since we are focusing on youth in ROTA program, so we starting with focusing on secondary schools mainly. And the other part is providing capacity building to youth in green skills, so they will be capable of identifying and leading youth climate actions within their communities, and participate and engage meaningfully in tackling those issues faced by their communities. Just also to echo and recap from what our esteemed colleague just mentioned, that we believe that collaboration and partnership between government, civil society, youth organization, and are very crucial to support meaningful youth engagement in climate action. Also, we put some of these things in practice while, jointly with UNDP, implement a boot camp about climate change innovation for youth in Egypt during the last COP at Sharm el-Sheikh. And it's become, come out as another commitment from us to follow up and see where this going, and not to stay on shelves and papers. And of course, we are really welcoming such a partnership with LDCs countries, who is also a high priority in our list of or map of country of concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abdullah. Good to hear from your new strategy for 2023, moving forward, taking climate education, especially on the green skills for green jobs. It's quite innovative to help young people looking to more jobs, where exactly to work in the future. That's very key areas. I wish all the best for the program and hope to work together.
Yeah. Can I just
Please.
follow up here? And for our programs, it's mainly focusing on the skills itself. So we believe there is another players on the ground, on the fields, to take care of job creation. But we don't think the skills have enough attention and investment in terms of the needed and engagement, as my colleague Elila and Brenda mentioned. From as much as innovation is important, we believe also the local and knowledge indigenous knowledge systems are very also important and crucial to create such a project. So those skills need to be reflected as a community service during those projects. And then, of course, we are more than happy if the others comes and help them to take it to another level for generating incomes and so forth.
Thank you, Abdullah. Once again, a round of applause to Mr. Abdullah for bringing up those quite interesting points on not just bringing green jobs, but making those young people as skilled to take up those jobs. Thank you once again, Mr. Abdullah. So I just now move into more on our youth, our young champions here, to see what are their concrete recommendations they may have on the LDC5 Youth Declaration to really push it from just a declaration to action. So I will start with Humphrey Merma from Tanzania to give his concrete recommendation, one or two, to actually how would really take these declarations to super actions, because we have been hearing declarations after declaration. I want to see some of the concrete actions to, it is up to us along with this agency and the member state to make it happen. So I want to hear from you what are those, and I will come back to other colleagues here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for this question. Yes, well, the Youth Declaration is instrumental in making sure that the Doha Program of Action is implemented. But tracing back to history, since the Montreal Protocol in 1987, the Earth Summit in 1992, the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, Copenhagen Conference in 2009, Paris Agreement in 2015, all these have addressed climate change as a problem, but never as an opportunity. As we are speaking about unleashing youth potential in climate action, let's think about how we can explore, how we can unlock, and how we can leverage climate opportunities. Statistics provided by IRENA shows that more than 122 million jobs can be extracted from energy transition. What are we doing about it? How are we holding ourselves accountable in providing climate jobs? Because, you know, we can be speaking only about loss and damage while young people are starving. We can't be speaking about youth action while young people are not having jobs. So I think this is a very critical opportunity to make sure that we use climate change not anymore about problem, but as an opportunity. As we are speaking, while I'm rewinding I'm marking the end of my remarks, I would like to share with young people the opportunity provided by the Youth for Climate, whereby they are funding different youth-led initiatives in all countries across the world, and they are funding up to 20,000 USD. The deadline is 31st of March. Let's use these opportunities as young people to showcase what we are wanting to do in our communities. Meanwhile, also the office of the youth champion for COP28 is also coming with a very wonderful project to make sure more than 100 delegates are being sent to COP28. We need more initiatives like this. We need to see more like this from the UNDP, from UNICEF, from UNESCO, from private sectors, and making sure that young people are always involved. As I used to say in my famous cliche, if not now, then when? If not us, then who? If not us, when? If not now, then who? Kama sio sasa, lini? Kama sio wewe, nani? Se non ora quando, se non tu ci. I rest my case.
Thank you, Humphrey, for that very emotional and but very informative lines. Why are youth still looking for, seeing climate change as just an issue of impacts, rather than looking at this as an opportunity for young people to contribute in a very constructive way. And also the jobs you mentioned in energy transition, which is actually linking with green skills and green jobs, which Abdullah was mentioning. It's quite resonate that things are there on the platter, but we are not yet to eat it. That's the issue, I believe. So I go to my next colleague, Brenda, to come up with some of her recommendation to put the LDC5 recommendation into action.
All I can say is my plea to our different governments to say, as they are coming up with different frameworks on how to implement the Doha program of action. I think if we are to achieve youth and children mainstreaming, it's high time where they're seeing youth and children as partners and not as threats, and see them as opportunities to collaborate and help them like push forward the agenda, and not necessarily as people who are there to like bring commotion and troublemakers, because we don't want to see ourselves as troublemakers or there to cause trouble. We want to see ourselves as partners in the implementation of the Doha program of action. and they should make sure that their doors are open. Give us the opportunity and the platform to actually be able to have approach them also, because we want to learn from them and also collaborate with them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brenda, for bringing that again on youth involvement and why it's necessity, and why making sure that young people are really super involved in collectively implementing those recommendations to action. Thank you, Brenda. I move next to Eliala for her sort of recommendation.
Thank you very much. I just want to reiterate what my other youth delegate has said, but just recalling or giving it to the context of Tuvalu. We all know when a disaster strikes your country, who do you call? Young people. Who are the hands and the legs who will be responding? Young people. So with this, we're doing the work, but we're not in the center of decision making. So I just want to add that, please do support us with funding and technical support, and also respect that we can take ownership of this and trust that we can persevere. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eliela, for reiterating that again, why you should trust young people, because they are the only one going to deliver at the end of the day. This is them when you remember when you get into emergency. We don't want you to press the button for us to come, but to be there on the table before you press the button. So thank you, Eliala, for that. Now I move to Mohmed Okash for his recommendation to put Doha Youth Declaration to action.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think now we have done the planning and the talking part. It's now to move into the action part. We know what to do and we know how to do. We have a very concrete blueprints, whether it is the Doha program of action and the youth declaration. So I think we need to form some sort of partnership among the private sector, the government, the development partners, the NGOs, and we, the young people, to move forward and take these plans into reality. As LDCs, we are in the race against time, so we don't have much time. When G20 is taking one step, we need to take 100 steps ahead. So in order to accelerate our path to graduate from this troubling category of countries. So I want to conclude my remarks with a very famous quote by the Margaret Mead, which says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, this is the only thing that ever has." Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed, for that well-said words. With that, I just move into one of the other development agency partner here from UNESCO, Ms. Farida Abudan, to see how you as a UN agency is supporting member states in strengthening meaningful youth engagement.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me today. First of all, let me convey warm greetings and the sincere apologies of our director, Mr. Salah Khalid, director of the UNESCO Office for the Gulf States and Yemen, who unfortunately could not join us in person today. I would like to thank the speakers and the young advocates for their brilliant and inspiring interventions. The urge to strengthen our collective climate action is clear, because there is no time and the least developed countries will pay the highest price of inaction and climate disaster. We, UN agencies, member states, many of us on this table in the hall as well, development partners and young people have no choice but joining forces to build a world in which young people are empowered to achieve their full potential. I think this has been the demand of today, enjoying the rights and being at the center of the decisions that affect them. I think the young advocates before me have made this clear. And then contributing as agents of change for the benefits of everyone, everywhere. So in terms of youth meaningful engagement, UNESCO commits to intensify its support and advocacy to member states to ensure active participation of young people in policymaking. We have a flagship initiative called the Youth as Researchers, and I'm happy to share that UNESCO will strengthen capacities of youth researchers to produce knowledge and find innovative solutions to today's multiple crises, such as socioeconomic inequalities, youth unemployment, and the deterioration of mental health. Within this framework, 12 national and regional research initiatives are currently being carried out, including 2 in Comoros and Madagascar on climate resilience. UNESCO will also continue to provide policy support to member states to develop inclusive national policies on youth with the participation of young people, as is in the case of Zambia, where an innovative youth policy toolkit is currently being piloted and will be published shortly. UNESCO will further enhance the promotion of intergenerational dialogues such as the one today, involving youth and decision makers to jointly identify solutions and challenges in LDCs. UNESCO will also support youth-led action and accompany youth-led networks to develop initiatives with social impact. The Youth UNESCO Climate Action Network, UCAN, is an important resource for multidisciplinary and innovative climate solutions. It offers an incredible opportunity to connect existing youth-led climate networks like the ones that we've seen today in achieving their full potential and impact. And many special thanks goes to Nishad today. Thanks a lot. You represent UCAN today, and thanks a lot for moderating these sessions so successfully. UNESCO will use the new Global Youth Grant Scheme and the associated multi-donor special account to support the youth-led research and action with social impact in all areas of UNESCO's mandate. Then let me move to education, of course, a key area of the UNESCO's mandate, and we've heard this morning many demands on education, and especially on greening education. So UNESCO has been worked since decades on something called Education for Sustainable Development. And at the Transforming Education Summit in September 2022, UNESCO and partners launched the Greening Education Partnership, which aims to support countries in accelerating the implementation of climate change education in response to climate crisis. This is what many of the youth advocates and people around this table have been asking for this morning. And UNESCO is supporting the development of a platform for collaboration and delivery of coordinated and comprehensive actions, focusing on 4 key areas: greening schools, greening learning, greening capacities, and greening communities. And key stakeholders, including member states, UN organizations, civil societies, and youth groups, are already joining the partnership and are collaborating around the 4 pillars. And key youth organizations have also joined the partnership. As part of its own contribution to the Greening Education Partnership, UNESCO promotes the whole school approach to transform education and has launched a project on greening every curriculum. So I think the demands on curriculum and including climate change in the member states' curricula has been also emphasized this morning. UNESCO will, together with partners, will develop a curriculum guide for policymakers and educators to be released in 2024, which builds on the findings and demands of a youth survey that UNESCO carried out in 2022 that gathered the voices of over 17,000 young people. And I'm going to give you a little bit of the findings as well, because I think they're very significant. 20% of all respondents from LDCs reported that they did not learn about climate change in school. 41% reported that they did not feel prepared to deal with climate change based on what they learned at school. And 39% from LDCs said the schools are not currently functioning as places to prepare people for climate change. So the policy guidance for curriculum is coming out in 2024 to respond to these needs. And at the same time, UNESCO is also engaging with 7 countries, including Cambodia, and it's a pleasure to have His Excellency, the Minister of Youth and Sport on this panel, Cambodia, but also Haiti and Mozambique, in developing an Education for Sustainable Development initiative for 2030 to further strengthen and develop education for sustainable development. Tanzania has also started the first phase of this initiative, and Sudan has shown interest in joining. The initiative, amongst others, has a focus on empowering and mobilizing youth around education for sustainable development. So in conclusion, I also would like to mention something that is called the Declaration of Ethical Principles in relation to climate change. This is the first and only ethical declaration adopted by the United Nations on the climate change topic. It was adopted by all 193 member states of UNESCO in 2017. And this instrument lays down globally agreed principles and concrete propositions for their application to guide decision-making and policy-making at all levels. And moving forward on climate justice and meaningful youth participation issues, we at UNESCO encourage our brilliant young activists to make use of this unique normative instrument to engage with UNESCO in broadening its use and implementation in your advocacy narrative materials and actions in cooperation with governments, the private sector, the international organizations, keeping a focus on people and especially the most vulnerable groups facing the effects of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Farida, to bring up the lost work of UNESCO on education and also bringing up the UCAN program, which myself is part of, and the Declaration of Ethical Principle on Climate Action, which is quite innovative, and we wish all the luck. And today we have heard from our young colleagues and young climate champions what they're really looking for, and I believe this could be implemented through a partnership and dialogue between the member state and development agencies and UN agencies collectively. With respect to time, we are running a bit short, but I would jump into a quick Q&A with very limited questions. I wish if you can pull up your name and organization and your question. Please keep it very brief and straight. Thank you. Start from there. Please keep it very brief. We need to vacate the room as soon as possible, so thank you.
Merci. C'est Jadon Kourouziza. Je viens du Burundi. Je vais demander la question à monsieur. Merci. Je m'appelle Jadon Kourouziza. Je représente la jeunesse burundaise et je suis représentant d'une association qui s'appelle Ça nous concerne tous. Nous faisons des activités de la protection de l'environnement dans mon pays. J'ai commencé à l'âge de 8 ans en protégeant l'environnement. Et aujourd'hui, nous dirigeons une association qui regroupe plus de 25 000 jeunes qui travaillent dans toutes les provinces du pays. Chez nous, au Burundi, nous avons 18 provinces. Et nous avons déjà multiplié et planté et distribué plus de 87 millions de plants des arbres, donc les arbres des différents arbres. J'aimerais demander à monsieur Hao Lang, secrétaire général de PNID, directeur of bureau des programmes du PNID. Vous avez parlé de un programme qui regroupe 120 pays et en ce qui concerne le changement climatique. Dis-nous comment vous travaillez avec ces associations et ces 120 pays. Est-ce que le Burundi appartient parmi ces 120 pays? Et comment vous travaillez avec ces associations des jeunes? Et je profite de cette occasion pour remercier la représentante de l'UNICEF. Nous avons déjà collaboré avec votre représentant de l'UNICEF. Il s'appelle John et nous travaillons ensemble et il connaît nos activités et nous profitons de cette opportunité pour remercier l'UNICEF au Burundi. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I will take the question. Unfortunately, there is no translation here. I would request if someone can translate that question. Probably I have to come back on that question. Apologize. Make sure you keep a question, not a statement, please. So, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, very quick. Well, Humphrey kindly mentioned I'm here with the COP28
If
Youth
you
Champion
could
team.
stand and tell your name and organization,
Sure,
please.
sure. Hi, I'm Zan and with my colleagues from the newly created Office of the Youth Climate Champion for COP28, led by Her Excellency Shama Al-Masri. And Humphrey already mentioned, but we will be fully funding 100 youth from LDCs and small islands to come to COP28 in the UAE this year, and really want to have LDC and SIDS youth at the forefront. So we're having many consultations over this over the year, but I wanted to quickly welcome the youth on the panel to share what, for youth from LDCs and small islands, are your main hopes for COP28 in terms of how you'll be included and what you want to see from the COP decisions. Thank you.
Saying that, thanks for the announcement, and I'll take here one. I'll come back. Yeah, sorry, Mike, please here. We're short of time. We may have some discussions outside this room. Apologize for that. Please, can a mic here and stand up. Please make it a quick statement or even a question, so we can try to get maximum people.
All right. Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Daniel Onyetulem. I'm from Nigeria, and I represent Stevenson Holistic Care Foundation. We are working on the area of climate change and health. We're looking at some of the healthcare effects as a result of the consequential climate actions. However, there are some jobs we're already doing over there in Nigeria. We went a step backwards, to see how we can engage the youth to become SDG ambassadors in creating awareness, because just like many of the speakers have identified, that the issue of climate action is not being spoken about in the schools. People are ignorant. So many people do not have knowledge about what is happening, but yet they bear the consequences. So I want to find out how some of the agencies like UNESCO can come to support what we're already doing, because we're partnering with a university in Nigeria, University of Port Harcourt, and see how we can scale it up to other universities and create awareness in order to see how we can make the youth to become game changers as regards the topic of discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If from a UN agency, if someone want to briefly give a small statement, because we are running out of late, due respect. Yes, Brenda.
Yeah, thank you all for your questions. I think we can be available after the session outside the room. One point that wasn't mentioned that I want to mention: in many countries in LDCs, but around the world, it's now too hot to learn. So even if we get everything else right, we have trained teachers, children and young people come to school with food in their stomachs, and you have a safe space, it's still too hot to learn. So we need your help as young people from the LDCs and around the world to think about new specifications for learning places so that they're safe and cool enough to learn.
Thank you. From the UNDP.
Yeah, thank you. I think I also just want to make an announcement that's really pertinent to our subject, and also to really work very closely with the COP28 presidency. We have a project called the Youth for Program, Youth for Climate Program, together with our Italian government partners. We have a center in Rome focusing on energy access and the youth for climate actions. And we're going to have make a call for proposals very soon to invite young people, young innovators, to look at innovations in 4 areas: in energy, in education, in urban sustainability, and in agriculture. The best winners will receive a $20,000 prize, and the shortlisted candidates will be invited to go to a session in Rome where winners will be selected. All applicants, regardless if you're successful or not, will receive other support and opportunities to participate in climate for Youth for Climate Action. So we look forward to getting more.
Thank you, Mr. Hoiling Su, for letting us know about the new program and the Youth for Climate initiative. So I would now conclude, and if you have more burning questions, I wish our high-level champions and members from the UN agencies and youth champions are here. You can find them outside. So just my closing statement, what we heard from today's session from both high-level panelists and fellow youth and environmental advocates, recognizing that empowering youth and working together with them presents a historic and a transformational opportunity to lay a foundation for a peaceful and sustainable future. I thank our esteemed guests today on the panel from UNDP, UNICEF, UNESCO, and His Excellency, the Undersecretary from the Ministry of Cambodia, and my fellow climate champions and environmental champions here. Thank you once again for joining. I hope your voice would be heard to the necessary decision makers today. And thank you to all who joined us today, full pack house. Thank you once again for those who are joining online. And once again, I take the opportunity to wish all very happy Women's Day. Thank you once again. Let me see.